This is a very pretty color. Hello YouTube, very exciting video today. We're going to be going over a couple of GameCube development pieces, specifically the NR Reader, NR Writer, and we're going to be going over NR Discs as well, and also burning an NR Disc with an NR Writer, just to go over the process, since as far as I'm aware, no one's really ever documented that process. It's going to be exciting, interesting, cool, fun. Hope you like it.
The NR Reader is a piece of development hardware released by Nintendo for game developers to test their games in the late stages of development in a way that would be mostly similar to what a consumer might experience at home. This is because it is a disk-based unit, so you can test things like disk load times, and it's pretty much equivalent spec-wise to a standard retail GameCube, aside from this region switch on the left side of NTSC units, which allows users to switch the console between Japanese and English. The only real difference is the proprietary disk system, which is designed to only be able to read NR discs. If you tried sticking a retail GameCube game in an NR Reader, or an NR disc in a retail GameCube, neither would really know what to do with the other. This is because NR discs, unlike retail GameCube games, don't have a burst cutting area, otherwise known as a BCA, among other things.
What does a BCA accomplish? What is a BCA? In the words of Akita, stay tuned.
Nintendo, as you would have expected, had invested an amount of effort into copy protection for GameCube games. The method used for GameCube discs is actually pretty dang cool. If you hold a GameCube disc under light at the right angle, there's these little marks that you can see along the tracks of the disc data. These marks are actually straight up destructive laser blasts meant to annihilate data so that it's unreadable to a disk drive.
Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, save state. If the data on the disc is destroyed, how is the GameCube able to read the disc? Well, in the words of Kita, I'm glad you asked. Oh, okay, I'll stop with the Kita references. I'm sorry.
So, back to the BCA. It takes the form of this strip of data along the inner ridge of the mini DVD disc that almost looks like a barcode. For retail GameCube games, this data is used to piece together the data that is purposefully blown away by Nintendo as a form of copy protection.
Hey, that's pretty neat.
In addition to this destructive form of copy protection, there's a scrambling seed that mixes up the bits and bytes that makes it just a little bit harder to be able to rip the data off the disk.
Sorry.
NR discs don't have a BCA, those destructive laser marks as copy protection, or even a proper scrambling seed. Instead, the entire media is just exclusive ORed with the value of 9 in hex.
Since these weren't really meant to get into the hands of the public, I guess they sort of just picked a quick and dirty method to make it so you can't just plop one of these in a DVD drive and start reading the bits straight off of it or whatever. I don't know.
Now that pretty much covers the incompatibility and differences between NR discs and retail GameCube discs. There's more details I could go into, but that's a bit outside the scope of this video. However, I've included links to references and further reading in the description if you're interested in the nitty-gritty details.
Now let's talk about this bad boy, the NR Writer.
The NR Writer is an optical disc writer that is, surprise surprise, used to burn NR discs. NR discs are single-use media, so once you write to it, there's no turning back.
That being said, developers were usually given literal boxes of these things, or given to them on a giant spindle by Nintendo. So that wasn't really an issue for them. But in the current day and age, only a limited number of blank discs exist, so better make them count.
Hopefully this upcoming section is able to archive a glimpse into what went on in the QA and dev departments of game development companies at the time.
Yeah. So whenever you air dodge into the ground, it's like he's scooting up dust. I think it's kind of cool. Now you may be thinking, this thing doesn't look very special at all. It looks like just some dusty old DVD drive. And you'd be right, it is just a dusty old DVD drive. Specifically a dusty old Panasonic SW9501S DVD authoring drive. Uses an SCSI interface.
This behemoth actually was not exclusively made to write NR discs. Nintendo instead got permission from Panasonic to write a firmware for it to enable them to properly write NR discs to spec. To use this thing, you're going to want to have a Windows 2000 PC. I tried with XP, but the drivers were wonky, so I just stuck with 2000. You're going to need an SCSI Ultra PCI card, probably one that uses an Adaptec chip. The one I have in this machine is an Adaptec 29160N. There's a couple different models that work as far as I'm aware, but I couldn't really find any specific documentation on it, so I just assumed this one from the era would suffice. Next, you're going to want to set the DVD drive's SCSI ID using this hardware switch dial thing on the back of the unit.
So with the way SCSI works, you can actually daisy chain multiple of these drives together while assigning each one a different ID. In the NR Writer software, it would let you burn to multiple drives at once as long as they're all hooked up properly. This feature would allow developers to get multiple test disks out to their QA departments quickly, so they didn't have to just sit and wait for a single drive to do one disk over and over and over again. But since we only have the one, we're just going to mark this as ID 1. The card is ID 0, and then we're going to flip this terminator switch on the back, so this is the last one in the chain.
After all the hardware is hooked up properly, we need to install the NR Writer firmware to the drive so that it knows how to author NR disks for the NR Reader. So there's this notice about needing to change the transfer rate of your SCSI card to asynchronous so that the firmware can get written properly. And while it says it only applies to a specific model, I didn't want to take any chances messing up the flashing process considering I bought this thing for like $400. So I went ahead and configured my card for asynchronous anyways. After initiating the firmware tool, it'll reboot your computer to set some sort of auto-run configuration, and when it boots back up, you just rerun the firmware tool, and it'll search for all hooked up NR writers so it can write the firmware to each one. As it flashes the firmware to each drive, the bay opens, and when it finishes, it closes.
That's kind of cute.
After a reboot and setting the speeds back to their default 160 megabytes per second, we're ready to take a look at the NR Writer software. Installing it is as simple as a double click on an installer, and opening it is just about as easy. Next, take your GCM file, which is just a GameCube ISO renamed. For me, a backup copy of Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door I ripped using my soft-modded Wii, voted by you on Twitter, and provide that to the NR Writer software.
Now you might get this error here saying that it's not a valid GCM file. I think the developer GCM files and retail GCM files differ slightly, maybe with their headers or something. But in practice, these retail GCMs will boot just fine on a NR Reader.
When you're ready to start the burning process, hit the button and let it do its thing. This process takes about 20 minutes or so, and when it's done, bam! You have a hot and ready, right out of the oven NR disk ready to use in your NR Reader.
And that's it. That's the NR Reader playing NR discs, written by an NR writer. I hope you enjoyed the video and maybe you learned something new. But that'll be it. Thank you for watching.